Commemorations are being held across Britain as the country mourns the death of Queen Elizabeth II. Presidents, prime ministers, monarchs and leaders from around the world have been paying tribute to the life and service of the UK's longest-reigning monarch. Her death has elevated her eldest son, now known as King Charles III. He will address the nation later today. Well, let's take a moment to look at these live pictures. The royal gun salutes being fired now at London's Hyde Park in honour of Queen Elizabeth. There will be 96 salutes, that is one to mark each year of her life. Church bells have rung at Westminster Abbey, Windsor Castle and across parts of the country. Flags are flying at half-mast. Crowds have gathered outside royal palaces, leaving flowers and tributes for the late monarch. A public prayer service will be held at St. Paul's Cathedral later. Meanwhile, some of the biggest industry strikes in the UK have been called off. Royal Mail postal workers and rail unions say planned walkouts for this month will no longer go ahead as they respect the period of public mourning. The Queen's state funeral is expected to take place at Westminster Abbey in less than 2 weeks. Giles Gibson joins us live from London. Giles, how is the country preparing for the state funeral?
Well, you mentioned that gun salute, which is going off right now. You just heard one there. We've been hearing these once every 10 seconds, 96 of them, of course, one for every single year that Queen Elizabeth II spent on this earth. Much of that time, of course, she was monarch because she became queen at such a young age. In terms of how the country is preparing, well, there is just, at the moment, this outpouring of grief and respect. Just a few hundred metres down there behind me, I can tell you there is a queue of people waiting to get to the gates of Buckingham Palace just to make a simple mark of respect, to lay a bouquet of flowers outside the gates of Buckingham Palace, where, of course, Queen Elizabeth has spent so much of her life. And there are also other signs, really, here in the capital that this country is in mourning. We've heard church bells ringing out in the last several hours or so from Westminster Abbey, from St. Paul's, and also from Windsor Castle on the outskirts of London. All of this just marking the death of Queen Elizabeth II.
And the people, I'm sure, anticipating a speech by King Charles as he prepares to address the nation soon.
That's right. We've seen our first photographs, really our first glimpse of now King Charles since we heard the news of his mother's death and the fact that he had now taken on the throne. He spent the night at Balmoral Castle in Scotland after being by the side of his mother in her final hours. He spent the night there, and then we have now seen footage of him boarding a plane at Aberdeen Airport in Scotland, about an hour's drive from Balmoral Castle, and as we speak he is now heading south to come back to London, to come back to Buckingham Palace. Of course, places where he has spent most of his life, places he knows very well, but of course places he has never been before as His Majesty the King, as we saw on that statement for the first time, that statement marking the life of his mother in the hours after her death. We will then, of course, in around about 4 or 5 hours' time, we will see him addressing the nation for the first time as King Charles III. I think we can expect him to look back on his mother's life, but also try to say something about what his vision for the future is as he takes on this role that he's been waiting so many decades to take on.
Thank you for that update, Giles Gibson, reporting live there from London.
Queen Elizabeth visited at least 117 countries in her 70-year reign. She's the most widely travelled head of state in history. Many of these trips were here in Asia, including former British colonies that separated from the empire. Still, the Queen commands deep respect in this region, viewed by some as a symbol of stability.
Queen Elizabeth's commitment to engage with countries and leaders in this region began at an early stage in her reign. In 1954, just 2 years after ascending to the British throne, she visited Australia, an event that had been planned for her father, King George VI. It would be the first of 18 trips to the country, which hosted the Queen more than any other nation except Canada. In 1961, she visited India, just 15 years after its independence from the British Empire, a challenging time for both India and Britain. On her second visit, more than 3 decades later, Queen Elizabeth said it was no secret that there were difficult episodes in their past. In 1972, the monarch made a trip to Thailand. It was a meeting of two royals. King Bhumibol and the Queen forged a friendship over the decades. Queen Elizabeth was presented with a golden key to Bangkok. Then in 1975, she visited Japan and was welcomed by Emperor Hirohito. The Queen would meet with 3 generations of Japanese emperors during her reign. Then in 1986, Queen Elizabeth made one of her most important tours to China. It was seen as a critical piece of diplomacy, coming shortly after tough negotiations between China and the UK over the return of Hong Kong. As the first British sovereign to visit Beijing, her trip was regarded as a salve on historic wounds. Queen Elizabeth's last trip to Southeast Asia was to Singapore in 2006. With her death, people from the lands she saw reflect on her global influence.
还是挺难过的吧，她还是一个比较伟大的一个女性，不管是对英国也好，或者是对世界的也不能说是和平，最起码是她是起到一个很稳定的一个那种作用，是一个了不起的女性。
やっぱり日本とのね皇室ですかねのつながりも大きいし。で日本でいうと昭和っていうんですけどね、その時代をやはり大きな影響を与えてた方だなと思って大変残念に思ってますけど。
For people like me, because many people may not have known, that is much younger to me, may not have known much about the Queen. So that will be people feeling at the end of an era and all that would not arise for us, because we had got, even though we are a part of the Commonwealth, we are out of the royalty directly. But those old memories are pleasant.
Queen Elizabeth visited many other countries in Asia, including Indonesia, South Korea, and Nepal, and several Pacific Island nations. The high esteem in which Queen Elizabeth is held by these countries clearly measured by the heartfelt condolences from their leaders.
Singapore President Halimah Yacob and Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong have conveyed their condolences to British leaders on the passing of the Queen. In her letter to King Charles III, Madam Halimah reflected on the Queen's 3 visits to Singapore and how she presided over the first ever state visit to Britain by a Singapore president in 2014. In his letter, Mr. Lee paid tribute to the Queen as a great world leader. He said she left a significant mark on Singapore's history and its long-standing relations with the United Kingdom. Mr. Lee also extended his condolences to the newly elected British Prime Minister Liz Truss. He says the Queen stood as a symbol of hope and stability, as well as continuity, and her passing is a tremendous loss to the Commonwealth family. Mr. Lee signed the condolence book for the Queen at Eden Hall, the official residence of the British High Commissioner. As a mark of respect, state flags at all government buildings in Singapore will be flown at half-mast on the day of the funeral.